Under the bright lights of a roaring stadium, the crowd was electric, their voices merging into a deafening wave of anticipation. Every fan knew they were about to witness something extraordinary, something that had never happened before. On one side of the ring stood Conor McGregor, the brash, lightning-fast striker with a mouth as sharp as his left hand. He had faced countless warriors inside the cage, but tonight his opponent was not a seasoned MMA fighter or a rival from the UFC. No, this was something entirely different. Across from him, with a twisted grin and a glint of wild excitement in his eyes, stood Jeff Hardy. A legend in his own right, a daredevil whose body had been put through tables, ladders, and chairs more times than anyone could count. This was a clash that defied expectations, a battle between precision and chaos, technical mastery and reckless abandon. It started as a whisper, a rumor that spread like wildfire through the fight world and the wrestling community alike. Could it really happen? Would one of the most dominant strikers in combat sports dare to step into the ring with a man who thrived on unpredictability? At first, fans dismissed it as fantasy, a mere what-if scenario that would never leave the realm of speculation. But then, the impossible became reality. Contracts were signed, the date was set, and just like that, the world found itself on the edge of something unreal. The very thought of these two icons colliding sent shockwaves through both industries. How would McGregor handle a man who had no fear of pain, someone who had spent his entire career crashing through steel and wood just to entertain the crowd? And could Hardy, a man who had never truly fought in a legitimate combat sport, survive in a fight where skill, not spectacle, determined the outcome? The buildup was unlike anything seen before. McGregor, as expected, wasted no time launching verbal grenades. He mocked Hardy's reckless style, calling him a madman who belonged in a circus rather than a ring. He questioned his toughness, claiming that the first clean shot would put him to sleep. But Hardy, unfazed as ever, met every insult with a smirk. He had been through worse. He had been broken, battered, and bloodied countless times, yet he always got back up. And that, he promised, was what McGregor would never be able to prepare for. The fight wasn't about skill alone. It was about heart. And if there was one thing Hardy had an endless supply of, it was that. Training camps painted a picture of two vastly different preparations. McGregor, as expected, sharpened his weapons with military precision. Every strike, every counter, every defensive move was drilled to perfection. His coaches knew Hardy wasn't a traditional fighter, but they weren't about to let chaos disrupt their strategy. Hardy, on the other hand, approached training like he did everything else, unorthodox, unpredictable, and driven by pure instinct. He wasn't trying to outbox McGregor or outkick him. He was preparing for something else entirely. A fight that wouldn't be fought in a straight line, but in a storm of movement, risk, and defiance. As the fight night neared, the world could only guess what was about to unfold. The MMA purists scoffed at the idea that Hardy stood any chance. To them, this was a mismatch, a novelty act that would end the moment McGregor decided to finish it. But the wrestling fans, the ones who had watched Hardy survive the impossible time and time again, knew better. Hardy had built a career on making people believe the unbelievable. If there was one man crazy enough to shake the very foundation of what was expected, it was him. The night finally arrived, and the energy inside the arena was unlike anything seen before. Celebrities, fighters, wrestlers, and fans from both worlds filled the seats, each of them eager to see how this spectacle would unfold. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing the fighters with the kind of theatrical flair that only added to the surreal nature of it all. Hardy bounced on his feet, shaking his arms loose, his face painted in signature war colors. McGregor stood across from him, calm, composed, his signature smirk in place as he tapped his gloves together. The referee brought them to the center, issued his final instructions, and then, with a simple command, stepped back. The bell rang. For a brief moment, they stood still, sizing each other up. Then, in the blink of an eye, McGregor exploded forward, his left hand already cocked, ready to end it before it could even begin. Hardy, however, wasn't there. With the reflexes of a man who had spent decades launching himself from ladders, he slipped to the side, rolling out of range with a grin that sent the crowd into a frenzy. McGregor, unfazed, reset his stance, eyes locked on his opponent. This wasn't going to be a normal fight. This was going to be something else entirely. And then, in an instant, Hardy did the unthinkable. Hardy sprang onto the ropes, his movements fluid and instinctive, his grin widening as the crowd erupted in disbelief. No one had ever dared to fight like this against McGregor, at least, not in a real fight. The Irishman narrowed his eyes, his muscles coiling as he prepared to strike again, but Hardy was already in motion. He leapt off the ropes, twisting midair in a way that no traditional fighter ever would. McGregor barely slipped out of the way, his expression shifting from amusement to something colder. This wasn't just showmanship. This was a different kind of danger, one that couldn't be predicted by any conventional strategy. Hardy landed smoothly, his body reacting before his mind could even process the movement. Years of wrestling, of risking everything for the spectacle, had trained him to trust his instincts. But McGregor was a different beast. This wasn't a scripted match. There were no pre-planned spots or safety nets. Every move mattered, and the wrong one could end the fight in an instant. The realization sent a thrill through him. He thrived on uncertainty, on diving headfirst into situations that no sane man would. That's what made him who he was. And tonight, that was what he needed to rely on. McGregor feinted, testing the distance, his mind already adjusting to the wild, unpredictable style in front of him. Hardy was fast, but speed alone wouldn't save him. The Irishman had fought against some of the best strikers in the world. He knew how to read movement, how to bait reactions, how to break a fighter down piece by piece. He just had to find his opening. And then, as Hardy shifted, his weight slightly too much to one side, McGregor saw it. He launched forward, his left hand rocketing toward its target. The punch connected. The impact sent Hardy stumbling, his head snapping back as pain exploded across his jaw. The crowd gasped, expecting him to collapse. But somehow, impossibly, he stayed on his feet. His body swayed, his vision blurred for a split second, but then a laugh escaped his lips. Not a taunt, not arrogance, just pure exhilaration. McGregor had hit him with the kind of shot that had put countless fighters to sleep. And yet, he was still standing. He ran a hand across his chin, feeling the sting of the strike, then looked up at McGregor with an expression that sent a shiver through the arena. McGregor exhaled sharply, shaking out his hand. He had landed clean, yet Hardy had absorbed it in a way that didn't make sense. He had fought men with iron chins before, but this was different. Hardy didn't react like a fighter. He reacted like a man who had spent his life defying pain itself. It was unsettling, but McGregor wasn't about to be thrown off. He stepped forward again, his footwork crisp, his strikes beginning to flow more naturally. If Hardy wanted chaos, McGregor would drown him in it. But Hardy had no intention of playing a conventional game. The next time McGregor lunged, Hardy ducked low, rolling forward before popping up behind him in one fluid motion. The audience roared as McGregor spun around, his frustration barely hidden now. Hardy was treating this fight like something out of a dream, refusing to engage on normal terms. He wasn't trying to outbox McGregor or trade kicks. He was turning this into something completely new, something McGregor hadn't trained for. As the fight progressed, the tension only thickened. Every time McGregor thought he had Hardy figured out, the daredevil pulled something unexpected. One moment, he was dodging punches with bizarre, almost unnatural flexibility. The next, he was launching himself off the ropes again, using the very environment to his advantage in a way no one had anticipated. The rules of combat were being rewritten in real time, And no one, not even McGregor, knew how this was going to end. Outside the ring, the world was watching in stunned silence. Fans, analysts, and fighters alike couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't just another crossover fight. This was something else entirely. It was raw, unpredictable, and impossible to look away from. Social media was already exploding, the internet divided between those who believed McGregor would eventually land the knockout blow and those who were starting to wonder if Hardy might just shock the world. But deep down, even McGregor could feel it. This wasn't a fight he could coast through. This was a storm, one he had to weather carefully. And if he wasn't careful, he might just find himself caught in something he couldn't escape. Then, in an instant, Hardy did something no one expected. Something that changed everything. Hardy took 3 quick steps back, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths, but his grin never wavered. McGregor, shifting his weight from foot to foot, kept his hands up, his mind recalibrating. He had fought unorthodox opponents before, but this was something else. Hardy wasn't just unpredictable, he was chaotic in a way that couldn't be trained against. Every move he made defied logic, as if he had no interest in fighting the way he was supposed to. But Conor McGregor had built his career on dismantling the unexpected. He wouldn't be thrown off, not by Hardy's theatrics, not by the wild, reckless movements. Then, without warning, Hardy did something that made the entire arena gasp. He turned his back to McGregor. For a split second, the Irishman hesitated, caught between instinct and confusion. Was this a mistake? A trick? A taunt? Before he could decide, Hardy sprang forward, launching himself into a backflip, his boots cutting through the air like a blade. The move was so fast, so reckless, that McGregor barely had time to react. He threw himself to the side just in time, feeling the rush of air as Hardy's body spun through the space where he had just been standing. The crowd erupted, half in awe, half in disbelief. No one had ever tried something like that in a real fight. McGregor landed in a crouch, his eyes narrowing as he sprang back to his feet. That was it. No more room for showboating. No more games. Hardy was playing with fire, and McGregor was about to burn him for it. He exploded forward, his fists flying, and this time, he wasn't holding back. A left hand clipped Hardy's chin, followed by a brutal right hook to the ribs. The impact sent Hardy stumbling, his breath leaving his lungs in a sharp exhale. McGregor moved in, pressing forward, sensing the moment to end it. But just as he was about to throw the final shot, Hardy did something that made the crowd scream in shock. With his back nearly against the ropes, Hardy used the last bit of momentum from McGregor's strike, leaping up, planting his feet on the second rope and springing backward with a spinning kick. The movement was so fast, so fluid, that McGregor didn't see it coming. The heel of Hardy's boot slammed against his temple, and for the first time in the fight, McGregor staggered. The arena erupted into chaos. McGregor shook his head, trying to clear the sudden fog clouding his vision. That kick had been unexpected, but it hadn't been enough to drop him. Hardy, however, saw the moment of hesitation, the briefest flicker of vulnerability, and that was all he needed. He lunged forward, throwing himself at McGregor in a way that made no sense in a real fight, yet somehow it worked. He wrapped an arm around McGregor's neck, his legs kicking off the ground as he used every ounce of his weight to drag the Irishman down. For the first time, McGregor was off balance. For the first time, he wasn't entirely in control. The realization hit him at the same time his back hit the canvas. The moment he landed, he twisted, trying to free himself from Hardy's grip, but the daredevil clung on like his life depended on it. This wasn't a traditional submission attempt. It wasn't clean or technical, but Hardy didn't care about technique. He cared about survival. McGregor gritted his teeth, his muscles tensing as he fought to break free. He had been in deep waters before. He had fought against world-class grapplers, submission specialists who had spent their lives perfecting the art of control. Hardy wasn't one of them. He was wild, unpredictable, but he wasn't an elite ground fighter. McGregor knew that if he could just create a little space, he could escape. But then, the unexpected happened. The lights above ring flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough to make everyone in the arena pause. The atmosphere shifted, an uneasy energy settling over the crowd. McGregor barely registered it, too focused on breaking free from Hardy's grip. But Hardy felt it. A shiver ran down his spine, a familiar presence creeping into the edges of his mind. The audience wasn't just reacting to the fight anymore. Something else was happening. Something no one could explain. And then, in the middle of the chaos, the sound of static crackled through the speakers. The big screens around the arena glitched, the image warping for just a moment before returning to normal. McGregor shoved Hardy off him, rolling back to his feet, his eyes darting around, confused by the sudden change in the air. Hardy, breathing hard, wiped the sweat from his brow, but his expression had shifted. He wasn't just in a fight anymore. He was in something bigger. The ref stepped forward, making sure both fighters were ready to continue, but the energy in the arena was different now. The crowd still roared, but underneath it, there was an undercurrent of tension, of something unseen building just beneath the surface. Hardy looked up at McGregor, and for the first time, the confidence in his eyes was replaced by something else. Not fear. Not doubt. But awareness. McGregor raised his fists, ready to go again, but Hardy hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Just long enough for McGregor to notice. And in that moment, something shifted. The fight was no longer just about winning or losing. There was something else at play. Something neither man fully understood yet. And the worst part? The fight had only just begun. McGregor took a step forward, fists still raised, his sharp eyes locked onto Hardy. But something in the air had shifted. It wasn't just a fight anymore. There was an unspoken force in the atmosphere, something neither of them could fully grasp. The crowd's energy had changed too, their cheers mixing with murmurs of confusion. The brief flicker of the lights, the static over the speakers, it should have been nothing, just a technical glitch. But Hardy knew better. He had been in moments like this before, where reality felt just a little too thin, where something unseen lurked just beyond the edges of what people could understand. McGregor wasn't interested in superstition or unexplained phenomena. All he saw was an opponent hesitating, and that was all the opening he needed. With the precision of a sniper, he launched a left straight, his most devastating weapon aimed right for Hardy's chin. But in a moment that defied every expectation, Hardy didn't dodge. He didn't block. Instead, he surged forward, throwing himself into the strike, absorbing the full force of McGregor's fist with a sickening crack. The crowd gasped, expecting him to crumple. But Hardy did something impossible. He laughed. His body staggered from the impact, but he didn't fall. A thin trail of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, but his expression wasn't one of pain, it was something else entirely. His breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something primal, something McGregor had never seen before. The notorious one, usually so composed, so cocky, took a half step back just for a moment. And in that moment, Hardy struck. With reckless abandon, Hardy threw himself into McGregor, tackling him to the canvas with a force that sent shockwaves through the arena. The Irishman twisted, trying to escape, but Hardy clung on like a man possessed. The ropes trembled as they struggled, sweat flying from their bodies under the unforgiving lights. Then, in one final act of madness, Hardy broke free, leaped onto the top rope in one fluid motion, and turned to face the stunned crowd. They knew what was coming. Hardy spread his arms wide, embracing the moment. The Swanton Bomb, a move meant for scripted battles, not real fights, was about to be unleashed in the most high-stakes fight of his life. McGregor, groggy but still aware, realized what was happening and rolled to the side at the last possible second. Hardy crashed onto the mat, his body twisting from the brutal impact. The audience roared, half in excitement, half in disbelief. McGregor saw his chance and pounced, pinning Hardy down and raising his fist, ready to end it with one final shot. Then the lights cut out completely. Total darkness swallowed the arena, a wave of confusion crashing over the crowd. The massive screens around the stadium flickered, distorting into an eerie static. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of thousands of murmuring voices. Then, a deep, distorted voice crackled through the speakers, low and guttural. It wasn't clear, wasn't understandable, but it sent chills through everyone who heard it. And just as suddenly as the blackout began, the lights returned. The crowd erupted, blinking in the sudden brightness, their attention snapping back to the ring. McGregor was still on top of Hardy, his fist raised, but something had changed. Hardy wasn't resisting anymore. His body was motionless, his chest barely rising. McGregor hesitated, something unsettling crawling up his spine. He had been in fights where he knew his opponent was done, but this was different. Hardy looked empty. The referee rushed in, checking Hardy's limp form. The moment his hand touched Hardy's shoulder, the daredevil's body jolted like he had been hit with a surge of electricity. His eyes snapped open, but they weren't the same. The wild energy that had fueled him all night was gone. Now they were dark. Too dark. McGregor backed away instinctively. The crowd had no idea what they were witnessing, but they could feel it. Something was off. Hardy slowly pushed himself up, his movements stiff, almost unnatural. He turned his head toward McGregor, but he wasn't looking at him. It was as if he was looking past him, at something unseen. The referee signaled for the fight to continue, but McGregor wasn't sure he wanted to. He had been in wars inside the cage, but this wasn't just a fight anymore. Something had entered the ring that night, something neither of them had invited. Hardy took a step forward, then another, and McGregor braced himself. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, Hardy's legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to the mat, his body motionless once more. The referee rushed in, waving his arms, signaling the end. McGregor had won. The official announcement was made, but there was no celebration. No signature McGregor strut, no cocky speech. He stood in the center of the ring, watching as the medical team checked on Hardy. Slowly, the daredevil began to stir, blinking as if waking from a dream. He looked around in confusion, his expression dazed. The camera zoomed in, capturing every second of the eerie aftermath. The fight was over, but the questions were just beginning. What had happened in those last moments? Why had Hardy changed so suddenly? And what was that voice that had echoed through the arena? McGregor left the ring that night victorious, but he didn't feel like a winner. Hardy, sitting in the corner with his back against the ropes, wiped a hand across his face, smearing the remnants of his face paint. He looked up at the big screen, where the final replay was being shown. And in the static-filled distortion of the footage, just for a split second, there was something else in the ring with them. Something that had never been there before. Neither man ever spoke about that night again. But everyone who watched it knew something had changed in that fight. Something beyond punches and kicks, beyond wins and losses. And whatever it wasn't done yet.